Well,
I'm just going. I'm going Californicator, 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 Californicator. Contemporary mythology.
my life mantra is, it's all my fault, and I'm not sorry.
That's all. Sorry, not sorry. What's the time? I guess I got it. 3 minutes. Coming up on 2 minutes out. Yeah. Coming up on 2 minutes out.
Am I talking loud enough? I presume I am.
He says yes.
Very good.
Still not sure. Is this my camera here? Right? Is this one I'm pointing at? Yeah.
Simon, which camera is Sarah pointing at and waving at?
Is that my camera?
That's the right one.
Because all it looks like a miniature, because it's so bright right now, it looks like a miniature Darth Vader hat. And that's all I can see. Okay, yeah. Oh, my God, we both thought Star Wars. But I can't sit from here. It's so bright. It just looks like dun, 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 dun.
Oh, is it over there?
That's this. It's closer to me. Da, 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 da. In front of you. Da, 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 da. Closer to me. Towards us. The big riser with the... Yeah. My problem, too.
Doesn't matter.
I
don't need to know.
The camera when I leave because I don't want to go by you. And that'll be fun. 1 minute. Da-da-da. Dun, da-da-da-da-da. Yes.
10 seconds out. 10 seconds? We were. This is Vashon. We're VashonLIVE. Nobody seems to mind, because they also are.
It's going to be about 5 minutes. Can Jennifer come here when we go to light? I need to check the other end of the encoder.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Black Cat Cabaret. We are officially celebrating our second week in this space, and we really want to thank Adam and Megan for letting us use the Snapdragon and Vashon events for your continued support, and everybody at home. Tonight we have something really special. Richard Jones is here. If you don't know Richard Jones, he's been here for 30 years. He's the author of many short stories. He's going to be reading from his first novel tonight, Fireweed Entrance. A Fireweed Entrance? The Fireweed Entrance. It is his first published work out of Vashon. You can find more about Richard and a place and the website to buy his book in the comments below. You will also find in the comments below a link for Vashon Project, the Vashon Dove Project, which is Richard's charity tonight. He would like you to donate to, which is a charity of. Sorry. So if you're wanting to reach out, tip Richard tonight, please go to Vashon Dove Project to donate. With no further ado, Richard. I'm on the third Lord of the Rings, though, for about the third smoking and drinking
Every
gin and
single
tonics.
episode.
Oh my God, it's so ridiculous.
So,
It's so ridiculous.
so I'm about to do the same thing.
Oh my God, AFAB marathon. How many seasons are there?
I don't know. It'll take a while.
It'll take a while. Quarantine will be over by then.
Show me who owns that show.
Oh my God, the
Child.
the kid with the girl that brings the boyfriend home, and then the parents.
Sorry for the delay, ladies and gentlemen. We will be back very shortly.
Okay. No worries.
Well, I just need the encoder to line up. It might take a second.
Okay. People wait, they don't know the difference. Jennifer has the info.
Okay, everybody stop panicking now.
God, calm down.
Panicking. Simon at the very last minute. Oh, wait.
Oh,
Oh,
oh.
I was going to say, oh my God, did he fall asleep? Should I wear more blush? Simon, he's the only person who can see the monitors. Like, should I wear more blush, Simon? I'm like, maybe now's not the time back. So good. It's
Happy.
what's it called? Gone with the wind. You know?
Queuing a network.
I'll wear that.
Queuing a network.
I told Jennifer 5 to 7 minutes.
All right, 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Smells like hand sanitizer. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Black Cat Cabaret. We are celebrating our second week here at Snapdragon. Thanks again to Adam and Megan for letting us use this space, and thank you for Vashon Events for your continued support. We've got something really special tonight. Richard Jones is here. If you don't know who Richard Jones is, he has been on the island for about 30 years. He's an author of many short stories, and he's here tonight reading from his first novel, The Fireweed Entrance. He the book came out in January, just in time for the COVID-19. So we are really happy to be able to have him here sharing his book. He describes it as contemporary mythology with an ecological bend. So put your mind around that. You can find his website and a link to buy his book on our comments below. Also, in those comments, you can find a link to the Vashon Dove Project, which is where Richard would like to forward all of his donations tonight. So find all of those in the comments. Without further ado, welcome Richard Jones.
Hello, everyone, and I really want to thank you for being here tonight. This is pretty reminiscent of when I used to do radio shows on KBCS in Bellevue. I never had the faintest idea who was listening. I'm glad you're here. So I know that there's somebody here, and I'm very happy about that. I also want to echo my thanks to Megan and Adam for allowing us to use this lovely space, and to Vashon Events, and especially to these excellent people at VashonLIVE who are working so hard to give us a chance to see things and hear things that we wouldn't necessarily get to hear, especially right now. So, you know how it feels when your first novel comes out and you've got all these book tours to do and you've got all these people to talk to and everybody wants to know about it. And no, I don't know either, right? So the ideas for this book began germinating in the mid-90s when my beloved wife Nancy started taking me up to Mount Rainier for backpacking trips, backcountry trips and stuff like that. And I actually started writing this book in 2003 with what I think of as the other two-thirds of one of the world's smallest writers groups. There were three of us. Finished it pretty much in 2008. Spent 6 or 7 years looking for a place that wanted to publish it. Was lucky enough to find Chatwin Books, who wanted to publish it. And it came out, as was just said, in January of this year, just in time for a global pandemic. So here we are, and I am enormously grateful to Sarah and Bonnie and Simon and Jennifer for making it possible for me to do a reading. I got to do one reading at the Vashon Bookshop in the middle of January, and that was it. So over here to my left, may I introduce you to the mountain. This is a photograph, a really extraordinary photograph taken by our local island photographer, Biffle French. You can find Biffle's photography each year at the Holiday Artists Tour, and you can probably find it elsewhere too. And he takes really wonderful photographs. This is a picture of a lenticular cloud that got blown off the top of the mountain. Not something you see all that often. This here is what's known as product placement. This is my website where you can find some stories and some other stuff. Hopefully some of it's amusing. This is the website for Chatwin Books, one place to order the book if you want to. This is the website for Vashon Bookshop, someone who I think very highly of and who has been really good to me. If you have a favorite online bookseller, then you can always go to them because most of them have it at this point. This book, it's down there too if you can see it on the floor, is part one of a two-part set. And I just learned recently that part two will be released probably sometime in the next 30 days. Early to mid-May, I think, is likely. Could be a little sooner. So now that we've got all the commercial stuff out of the way, there's so much to tell you about. I want to read because I love telling stories. And just ask my wife. It's not very often that I tell one that she hasn't heard several times already. But I need to give you some context because we're going to start a little ways into it. This is a story that, at least at the beginning, is primarily about a fellow named Ray Holdman who has a unique and really difficult gift. I would say that he communicates with trees, but the fact of the matter is that the trees actually communicate with him. And he doesn't have a lot of choice in the matter. And his behavior when the trees are communicating with him tends to scare people. So his life has been pretty tough. He lives as kind of a undocumented outcast. I'm going to go ahead and read an article or an entry from Ray's journal, and this actually begins the book. I can't live this way anymore. I'm heartsick from uselessness, from pointless roaming. The trees, the plants, birds and animals, the ground itself all talk to me constantly, expecting me to know their meaning, and I understand none of it. I'm exhausted from wandering, driven from one place to the next by humans who are afraid of me and all the other peoples who want something from me. I come to the point of refusing to move anymore, while to stay where I am will bring disaster. Now, a complete stranger sends me away, like a rock flung out over a chasm with all of the thrower's strength behind it. As much as I hate and fear the sensation of falling, It's a familiar feeling, a well-known waking nightmare I can cling to, for I know exactly how to fear it. Where and how will I fall this time? He wrote this in the story in Seattle in August of 2000. The stranger that he meets that sends him out on a journey of unknown consequences is a man that he comes across after he's had a difficult encounter with a tree in Occidental Park in Pioneer Square in Seattle, which involves a run-in with a policeman who wants to take him to a mental hospital. Ray has already been through this kind of thing, and he's not eager to repeat the experience, so he manages to talk his way out of it. But in order to get himself back into the world of humans, he's got to find somebody that he can talk to about normal stuff for at least a half an hour. And then he can go on getting the hell out of town and doing whatever he needs to do to keep going. He meets a man who suggests eventually that he take himself up to Mount Rainier to, quote, ask some questions and listen for some answers. Since he's got to get out of town anyway before he gets busted again, he does exactly that. In the course of wandering into Mount Rainier, he first of all meets a man who mystifies him completely, who tells him some very strange stories about a group of people who live and work on the mountain, working with elemental forces of nature, so to speak. And after staying with this guy for a night, Ray gets restless and leaves and winds up walking down the Carbon River Road into the entrance of the Mount Rainier National Park. Rather than going straight into the park, he decides to cut across country. And in the course of looking at his map, he's drawn to a place called Mother Mountain, which is a place in the let's see now, I think it's the northwest portion of the park. And we're going to begin the story when he's gotten well up. Whoops. Lost my place. There we are. Only when he gets well up in the mountain do really interesting things begin to happen. Well, that's not true, but anyway, this is where we're going to begin. Before reaching 6,000 feet, the slope increased sharply and the undergrowth disappeared almost entirely. The trees were smaller still, and the ground around them was sparsely clad in low-growing Oregon grape and salal. Soon I was wending my way slowly upwards through the short brush thickets and around the trees, bent over almost double on the slope. When I stopped to rest, I looked ahead and saw a wall of granite rising up about 50 yards in front of me. It wasn't vertical, but it was close enough that I had no intention of going straight up it. A short map consultation indicated that I was at one of two places in the general area where the wall was nearly vertical, and that by moving to my right along the base of it until I crossed a little waterway called Doe Creek, I might find an easier way up. I set down my pack and sat on the ground for a longer rest. Because the slope here was so steep and the undergrowth low, I could see down it for a great distance. I'd only been sitting for a few moments when a movement far down caught my eye. Something was moving at what looked like an athletic runner's pace, though I couldn't see clearly. It was coming up the mountainside with remarkable speed, and it was moving directly towards me. At first I wondered if I was watching a bear. It moved so fast and certain over the steep, uneven slope. But I'd never heard of a bear moving in such a straight line, nor of one running so steadily on two legs. Still, I looked nervously around me to be certain there was no bear cub nearby that I was threatening. Of course there wasn't. whatever, or more likely at this point, whoever, was tearing up the mountainside would be here so quickly there wasn't much point in trying to evade them. Besides, where would I run? I sat quietly next to my pack and waited. I'd never seen a man walk up a 40-degree slope as fast as I could run on the level. He was easily 1.5 feet taller than me, which made him about 6'11", rangy and limber. He was carrying the biggest backpack I had ever seen. It loomed at least a foot above his head and appeared to be at least 2 feet thick. I couldn't imagine what it weighed unless it was filled with packing peanuts. He came to a smooth stop directly before me. "You Ray Haldeman?" He wasn't even out of breath, and he was looking for me. "Yes, that's me." He broke into a smile. "Excellent. I have some supplies for you." I gaped stupidly for a moment. I couldn't help it. "You have supplies for me?" "Of course. Hucklebark was the guy that he met earlier on that I told you about. Hucklebark seemed to think you'd be running low soon, especially since he said he drank half your coffee. My wits weren't keeping up with this as well as I might have liked. So, you know Hucklebark?" "Absolutely. Him and all the rest of the mountain's bringers, and a lot of others, too. I keep 'em supplied, and I get my exercise, I can tell you." Do you have a couple minutes to talk? Like maybe I could ask you some questions about all this?" He immediately slipped out of the enormous pack and laid it gently on the slope as if it was a child's day bag. "Yeah, sure. What do you want to know?" "Well, for starters, you know my name, but I can't say the same for yours." He bumped his forehead lightly with the heel of a hand. "I always forget. You know, I don't actually meet very many new folks in this line of work. I'm Ev, short for Everett Longhaul." "Well, pleased to meet you, Ev. You came up that slope in an awesome hurry. You must have a horrific schedule." "I move fast, but I never hurry," he said with a laugh. "There are a lot of folks to take care of, so when I get moving, I move right along. However," he continued, "I wouldn't do this if there weren't time to stop and talk." "I don't know where to begin, Ev. I want to ask too many questions, like, who do you work for? How many bringers do you supply? I still don't understand exactly what's a bringer. How do you get to be one if you want to be? Do you know someone called Mad Lupin?" Someone else from earlier in the story. "And what," I was running out of breath, "is this crazy show really about? And could there possibly be a place in it for anyone else?" Longhaul held up his hands in a "whoa, boy" gesture. "I'll do my best, Ray, but let's try and take this a piece at a time. First things first, you want some coffee, water, something? I'm a black tea man myself." He leaned over to his pack, snapped open a small compartment. A tiny cook stove, water bottle, and a smallish kettle emerged. Before I could do any more than think about it, the stove was assembled and lit, and the water was heating. I said black tea was fine with me. Ev wrapped his long legs into something a bit like a crane fly in a half-lotus position and stared thoughtfully at the ground. "Maybe the easy ones first. Of course I know Lupin, who you've heard referred to as Mad Lupin. She has to eat just like everyone else. She's pretty hard to keep up with, though," he said with a chuckle. "I think I recall that Hucklebark mentioned he works to you. I'm a pretty independent agent. I know what needs to be done and how to do it. I mainly see works when there's something I can't solve. Sometimes, too, I think he arranges to accidentally run into me once in a while. But to be honest, it's comforting to run into him. We have no bosses, Ray, no managers. I wouldn't say we work for anyone at all. We aren't involved with some kind of business here. We're a part of the workings of the world. We work together when it's time to, and we work totally on our own when it's time for that. But who runs this show, Ev? How's it put together? Who are you all? You know what, Ray? You might not like this answer too much, but when you get right down to it, we just are. Honestly, I think you got more important things to work out first. I looked at him abruptly. Like what? Well, he went on gently, I expect you don't need me to tell you that, but if you insist. I've heard you think of yourself as all messed up and crazy. Now, before you get too wrapped up in becoming not crazy, or however you think of it, I'd advise you to put in some work on how you're seeing things. That's all. Work on how I see things. That's all, Ray. You may not believe it, but most of us know a lot about not fitting in, or being considered one thing or another, or being kicked out of some place we'd come to think of as home. Tell me something. You had any interesting dreams since you got here? I waited for a bit, trying to decide what to say. Finally, against my better judgment, I told Longhall my experience of the previous night with the ancient man, and in a reckless burst of completeness, about the vine maple that spoke at dawn without being spoken to. Whatever I'd expected him to do or say didn't happen. Instead, he stared thoughtfully at the ground for several moments, then straightened up and knocked back the rest of his tea in one breath. Two things I have to say to that, and then I got to get going. First, that's one of the sanest stories I've ever heard from someone outside my little circle of folks. And who do you suppose that old fellow might be? Search me. I was hoping you might have an idea. Everett Longhall smiled broadly. Oh, yeah, I have some ideas, but I'm also certain that you need to work this one out on your own. The second thing, and my 2 cents, Ray, concentrate on where you are and who you're with, and set the bad and crazy part aside if you can. Well, thanks, Ev. Did you say you had some coffee for me? Dang, almost forgot. Haven't done that since I don't know when. Come by with supplies, then forgot to leave them. He was into that giant pack in an instant. Let's see here. The coffee, here's a pound of rice. Wicked hard to cook above 4,000 feet, you know. Some rye bread. Hang on to that container. They come in handy. Pound of cheese. Let me know what you like for next time. And a pound of peanut butter. Same goes for the container. Hucklebark said to suggest looking for some salmon berries before you get too high up, so as you could make some pemmican. I looked in wonder at the pile of food in front of me. Wow. Thanks, Ev. What do I owe you? Owe me? He looked up in surprise. Don't mention it. Anyway, I'll see you around. Oh, and by the way, if you head a couple 100 yards to the right, you'll find a pretty nice cleft in this wall, and it's a good way to get up higher. Take care of yourself, Ray. With that, he shrugged into his pack and loped off down the slope, moving with sureness and grace at a rate I couldn't have matched if I'd been rolling end over end. Everett Longhall was right about the cleft. It looked like the only reasonable way up, and barely reasonable at that, as far as I could see in either direction. I wondered if he was right with his other advice, too. From the bottom, the wall looked to be about 100 feet high, and as I started up, I hoped it wouldn't be any higher. I also decided I'd look hard for another way back down when the time came for that. The last 20 feet were the hardest, as they generally are. Up until then, there had been abundant footholds that held firm under my weight, and the one place where there was almost nothing to hold on to had offered an exceptionally tough clump of bunch grass for balance and encouragement. At every glance, the last stretch looked for all the world like a featureless expanse, close enough to vertical that there was no way for someone who knew nothing about rock climbing to go on. But each time I thought there was no next foot or handhold, that the stone in the wall was smooth and without opportunity, my hands or feet came across some small opening that my eyes hadn't found, and I moved once more. With one last heave, I brought the top half of my body over a ledge and into another world. In the short space of that near 100 feet of altitude, the land and I had moved decisively from the Hudsonian zone to the Arctic Alpine. Broken rock lay atop coarse, sandy soil dotted only here and there by clumps of tough mountain grasses, thin blankets of low-growing heather, and a sprinkling of dwarf lupin. There were no trees to be seen, not even the contorted dwarfs found on the interglacial ridges on other parts of the mountain. Off to my left, about 10 feet away, a striped chipmunk perched on a small flat stone. It had waited, poised for flight, to see what kind of creature might be clambering up the rock wall. Having seen for itself, it turned and vanished in a flicker of red-brown. The ground here angled gently upwards, increasing in steepness as it approached what appeared to be a ridge several hundred yards above me. I hadn't been certain from the map whether this part of Mother Mountain's top was a shallow caldera or simply a rolling plateau, and I was deeply curious to see for myself. Perhaps what had drawn me here would be up there, for so far, though the landscape was fascinating and austerely beautiful, I still had no idea why exactly I felt so compelled to come. My feet sank into the sand and gravel as I made my way up, admiring the tough, unpretentious plants that lived here and their flowers, so delicate in such a harsh landscape. Rather than zigzag my way up the last stretch of the slope, which would have been a lot easier, curiosity drove me straight up. As usually happens, the climb to the top was much farther than I thought. When I finally reached the top of the ridge, chest heaving, I stopped in my tracks. I looked down on a shallow oval bowl, a quarter-mile long, 200 yards across, perhaps 100 feet deep. I wouldn't have been surprised to see an ancient god striding across the depression on some celestial business, or a bodhisattva sitting still as a stone, deep in a centuries-long meditation. There was no one of that elevated company, of course. But the floor of the bowl was richly covered in wildflowers and grasses, all stretched to the limits of their height, reaching for the warmth and energy of the summer sun. There were a few remaining avalanche lilies, their white, star-shaped blossoms long turned to seed farther down. Thick patches of low, blue-tinged mountain phlox, dotted with the crimson blooms of Indian paintbrush. Somewhat taller than the rest, the lupins reached out to the sunlight with their deep blue flowers. And on the other side of the bowl, a solitary tree. It was no more than 6 feet tall, gnarled, slightly lopsided, twisted around by the ferocious winds that swept through even this protected place during the winter storms. I was drawn to it irresistibly. I walked as lightly as I could across the concave meadow, trying not to step on any of the marvelous not-humans who made their home in a place where I couldn't possibly live, making straight as possible for the tree. It was a 6-foot mountain spruce. 3,000 feet downhill from this spot, its relatives reached a height of more than 100 feet. The seed that had fallen here, whether by the agency of wind, bird, or animal, had found the exactly correct instant of warmth and water, sent up a tiny, tenacious stem, and refused without let-up since then to yield to the tearing of the wind or to the punishing weight of snow and ice on its branches. I knew that at this altitude, this tree was at least a century old, perhaps much older. When I reached the tree, I set my pack down nearby and sat down close to it. The whorls of needles circling its twigs made endless patterns that led my eyes onward, up and down the length of its branches. I was filled with admiration for someone who could live here. The fact that I was visiting during the 1 month of the year when the weather could almost be counted on to be benign made it all the more remarkable. Under the tree's branches was a tiny world of fallen needles, thoroughly chewed cones, and wind-blown stuff. A couple of square yards of forest duff on a high alpine meadow. I reached out to lightly brush my fingers against the rough bark of the trunk, which was about 3 inches in diameter at the base, and felt something akin to an electric shock. I jerked my hand back to consider. Perhaps it was some kind of high-altitude trick of static electricity. Perhaps there was something in the tree's bark that had evolved to ward off creatures that might harm it. But the thought came unbidden to me that it had been a physical shock of recognition, and the harder I tried to dismiss the idea as foolish or random, the more it fixed itself in my mind. I moved to a position where I directly faced the tree, about 3 feet from it, and made myself as comfortable as possible on the uneven ground. The afternoon sun poured down on us both, and the faint breeze barely registered on my skin. I gazed at the tree, taking in more and more. The delicate infinity of patterns in its bark, its needles, the mysterious asymmetry of its branches that expressed an incomprehensibly complex response to the weather of this place. The more I gazed at it, the more I saw. Even the minute, chaotic jumble of tiny detritus at its base began to take on patterns fraught with meaning I could not uncover. In my mind, I said, "You are remarkable." In my mind, the tree replied, "Come in." Come in? And how would that happen? And what would happen? For lack of any concrete idea how to respond, I tried to relax my mind and my body and not do anything in particular. I thought about breathing and began to listen to and feel the way I was moving air in and out of myself. My skin began to tingle, very slightly at first and then more strongly. It slowly dawned on me that I was respiring with every surface of my body. I could feel the air touching my exposed skin, air slyly working its way under my clothing, briefly trapped by denim and cotton, but still working its way inside and back out. I was breathing everywhere, and my lungs were simply one part of a vast system that drank in the air and returned it, changed, to the sky. Was this what breathing is like to a mountain spruce? The ground beneath me began to change. It was still solid, but I could feel innumerable small openings in it. It was becoming something different from what I understood ground to be. The nerves in my legs and backside began to sense things about the ground I hadn't known before. There were ways to move into it, pathways inside it I could follow and feel. My nerves began to extend themselves, feeling their way into the softer, in-between places in the earth, moving downward, pushing aside the soil that would yield. They wound and looped around buried stone, holding on to it. This was my place, and it was my job to occupy it as best I could. The strangeness of these sensations diminished as time went by. It was replaced by a slow, deliberate kind of curiosity, and I found the wit to wonder dimly what was going on. While most of me was preoccupied with respiration and roots, a small section of my mind reveled in the notion that this tough, tenacious tree had opened a doorway for me into its soul. I felt honored way beyond my worth and gratefully accepted the offer. I yielded to the tree and slipped further in. My awareness of the ground continued to move downward, inch by inch. I don't know how deep into the earth I had gone, not very far, I imagined, when I encountered a layer of rock that at first seemed impenetrable. Most of my awareness then began to move laterally through the soil, always seeking least resistance, and always tending downward. A scrap of intention continued to probe the rock layer, looking for a way to force a tendril of myself into it. I found a tiny crack and began working a part of me into it, bit by bit. After going down a short ways, the crack closed completely, and leaving that small part of me burrowed tightly in, I moved my attention elsewhere. I tried to guess how long I had been with this tree, but the notions of time that I had always taken for granted seemed elusive. I found that it wasn't relevant to think about hours or minutes. Days were not really days. Those were completely artificial markers that attempted, without success, to divide the indivisible. The wind came and the wind went. So too, light and darkness. I remained as and where I was, responding to it all, without interest in tallying or labeling. I knew the sun was shining, but I could no longer see it. I knew the moon and stars when they shone, but nothing reached my eyes because they were no longer relevant. Everything was known through every surface of me, whether above or below ground. I knew when an inquisitive chipmunk climbed nimbly over me, looking for and finding food. I knew when the level of Ipsit Creek far below me rose and fell, responding to the changes in snowmelt and water table at its source high above. Not by hearing, seeing, or tasting, but by a sense I had never been aware of before. I took all of it in and remained still. I sensed movement far down the mountainside from me. It roused that deliberate curiosity that seemed to have become my way of being, and I reached out with my awareness to find out more. Something was moving across the face of the land at the very limits of my senses. It moved at a pace that seemed familiar, though it took a long, slow sifting of memory to find what I was looking for. It was a human, walking on the Ipsit Creek Trail nearly 3,000 feet below me. I gathered in the movement, the tiny changes in the landscape that rippled all the way up the slope to me. I drank it in like water and realized that maybe I was supposed to be one of those humans and not a mountain spruce. A sense of panic welled up, and though I fought to suppress it, I could not. Where was I? I was gone, that was where, subsumed in a beautiful, courageous, but mortally dangerous Arctic alpine spruce that had led me into its life and allowed me to become lost. As the panic rose inside me, the ability to be still slipped away, and I began to struggle in every way I could. My awareness came galloping back from the world and crawled into the closest, smallest space it could find, kicking and pushing to find its way back to a familiar place. I felt myself pulling against something, pulling as hard as possible. There was nothing more important than getting back to myself. I'd forgotten most of what myself was, but getting back to it was all that mattered. I pulled harder. Suddenly, I felt something give way. It was like being torn from something that had had me in an iron grip, and the pain was terrible to feel. I thought my body and mind would both be torn apart, but before that could happen, I lost consciousness. Ray, Holdman, wake up. A shoving at my shoulder, gentle but insistent. I thought I should open my eyes, but I didn't remember how. Some moments of dire confusion followed as I tried to take inventory of my body and couldn't remember what a body was. Then a piece or two bubbled up to the surface. Okay, I had arms and shoulders, one of which was still being prodded, legs and hands. They all hurt. Then the notion of eyes began to make sense again, and I opened them. Apparently I was lying more or less on my back, for the first thing I saw was a blaze of stars. The air was so clear they barely twinkled. Rather, they were more diamond-like than I could remember ever seeing them before. Even in August, the nights are chilly at this altitude, and I suddenly shivered. The stars were eclipsed by something much darker. It was a face, a woman's face. "Who are you?" It was abrupt and rude, and I knew it the moment I said it, but I couldn't remember exactly who or where I was. Perhaps if I knew who the face was, I might remember more. On second thought, it was a long shot, but the thing was done. She was having none of it. "We'll get to that later. First, I need to know if you're all right, physically all right, that is, and how soon you can move." She clearly knew a lot more about what was going on than I did. At least it seemed that way, and I figured stubbornness wouldn't gain much here. "I ache everywhere, but so far nothing appears broken or too thoroughly damaged. Why do I need to move? What's going on?" Her voice was matter of fact, but there was no mistaking the passion that lay underneath. "You've done some harm here, and your presence makes it hard to recover from that. The sooner we can get you a ways away, the better." "Harm? What did I do?" Her patience was wearing thin, but I guess she was willing to wait one more moment if it would motivate me to move. "You entered into the life of this spruce, and then removed yourself so roughly that the tree is severely injured. It can get on with healing itself if you go away, but not otherwise." I remembered it all in an instant. The mountain spruce I had loved and admired. It had invited me. Come in. And I had come in, and all the things I had felt, sensed, and learned came back. And then I had panicked, fearing that I'd never return to humanity. Now I was being told that I had hurt this trusting friend, the very last thing that I wanted to do. Is this really true? I hurt the tree? You hurt it grievously. My heart lurched at the thought of this. It was as if a generous, loving stranger had taken me into his home, and in a thoughtless, clumsy moment I had killed him. Will it live? Possibly. Now, will you get up so we can go? Time is important here, Ray Holman. I thought perhaps I should refuse to leave, that instead I should be trying to do what I could for the tree. It only took a moment to realize I wasn't even in good enough shape to help myself. I felt I was learning, maybe rather slowly, that there was no point in arguing with anyone in these parts. So without replying, I rolled over on my side and got painfully onto my feet, swaying slightly. I looked right and left. I should have a pack around here somewhere. She nodded to my right and behind. Back there. As I shrugged into the pack, my shoulders burned inside. Every joint in my body seemed to have been pulled out and hastily shoved back in. But my attention was focused on the mountain spruce, and in my disorientation it took a moment to find it. In the darkness, illuminated only by starlight, the tree looked no different than when I'd first encountered it. I had thought from this woman's manner that I would find a few splinters pointing vaguely upward. But here was clearly yet another thing that I did not understand. Perhaps when we got wherever we needed to go, I could learn some more. Better yet, when we got to wherever, maybe I could just go back to sleep for a week or so. She was already moving. I had finished my unsatisfactory contemplation of the mountain spruce and turned to follow. Every muscle in my body shrieked. I was reminded of the fact that there were actually muscles I didn't know I had. Keeping up was difficult, but I was in no mood or condition to just decide to ignore this woman and simply wander off somewhere at my own pace. Time was still eluding for the most part as a concept, but after what seemed like a short stretch of it, she slowed down enough for me to catch up with her. Though the stars were out, the moon was nowhere to be seen. Whether it hadn't risen yet or was already done for the night was more than I could tell. I stumbled often. Not that I'm complaining, at least not yet. But how far do we need to go right now? She half turned over her shoulder. Not much farther, I think. I think having a couple of ridges between us will do until daylight. She was as good as her word, in that soon we made our way, she with lithe grace, me looking and feeling in need of physical therapy, up and over a low ridge that led us into a small, barren depression about 50 yards across. Moving down into it, my feet told me that it was not so barren as all that. We trod on a carpet of ground-hugging grasses, flowers, and heathers, to the distress of that part of me that remembered all the warnings about fragile alpine meadows. Near the bottom of the carpeted bowl, the woman stopped. She looked around briefly and found a spot of mostly bare ground, where she sat down and motioned me to do the same. I slumped down gratefully, letting my pack slip off my back where I sat. I leaned against it, and the plywood box, that's another story, immediately dug itself into my ribs. It hurt so much less than the rest of my body, I ignored it. She looked to be younger than me, but a second glance told less rather than more, and I saw that she could be younger, older, or any place in between. She wore her straight, dark brown hair in a thick braid that reached most of the way down her back. All her gear, from jacket to jeans to boots and pack, bore the hallmarks of long, hard use coupled with excellent care. I had thought that when I had a chance to study her face, I'd find a hostile set to it, but the lines of her cheekbones and jaw were relaxed, if not smiling. She returned my gaze, studying me in turn, until the silence began to feel awkward to me. I asked, "What time is it?" She smiled then, a little. "Better you should ask, what day is it, from the look of things?" All the things I had breathed, tasted, sensed, and seen in ways that were still mysterious though I had done and felt them. How long had that taken? Maybe you're right. Come to think of it, what day is it? I don't remember what day it was when I came up here. It didn't seem very important at the time. From what the tree has said, I think you've been up here for 3 days, she said, and it'll be dawn in less than an hour. I hear you have good coffee. You up to making some? I hadn't felt like laughing, but she changed that. I gather you are one of the select millions who know Hucklebark, or maybe Ev Longhall. Sure, if I don't get to go back to sleep, I can do that. Wait a minute. From what the tree has said? I was in no condition to work through anything new right now, and yet the thought hammered at me. Who are these people? Still fogged from a mortally intense and painful emergence, and not knowing what else to do, I began to do what this mysterious woman had asked. Rummaging in my pack for the stove, water bottles, and supplies was a sharp reminder of how sore I was, and I failed to suppress a grunt of pain. She looked up at me. I'm sorry I had to make you move, but it couldn't be helped. If you want, we can get you some help after sunup. I think I'll be all right, I said, but I feel like I fell out of a tree and stopped, and amazed and distressed at what I had done, more than what I had said. As usual, I don't know where to begin, so I guess it doesn't matter where. For reasons not clear to me, there wasn't time for it before, but it seems that you know me, and I don't know you. Excuse me for a moment. You're right. There wasn't time before. We'll sort that out eventually. My name is Lila. Just Lila? Not good enough for you? God, there I go again. I'm trying not to say it that way anymore, but I can't help it. Of course it's good enough, Lila. I shifted on the ground, trying to find a more comfortable position and failing. I don't have any idea what I did or might have done to that tree. Maybe you could start with telling me how you found me and what you found. As I adjusted the water pan on my cook stove, she said, I found you because I was making my way around Mother Mountain, and I sensed a tree somewhere that was in a kind of distress I'd never experienced before. It was a good ways away from me, but I had to find out what was going on. When I got to it, you were flattened on the ground next to it, and the tree was fighting for its life. How could I have hurt it so badly? You do know, I imagine, especially after this experience, that trees are people, don't you? Of course I do, I replied, perhaps a little testily. That's something I knew before I ever heard one speak to me. The places where trees are thought of as nothing more than things to be consumed are among the many I don't want to live in. I can't help you with those places, she said, but consider how much damage someone could do to you, intentionally or not, if you let them into the deepest part of your being and they lost control and stamped around in a frenzy, breaking or damaging everything they came into contact with until they could get out. I thought I could understand that. Even though there had never been anyone in my life I might have invited inside me like that. In a low voice, I said, I was afraid. No, not just afraid. I was terrified. It doesn't excuse anything, but I felt like I would never come back, that I might never be human again. The water was boiling happily, and I threw 2 handfuls of grounds into the pot. No eggshells to settle the grounds today, so we'll have to strain it with our teeth. She smiled again, and it felt good to see her do that. I figured something like that might have happened. Tell me everything about what happened to you. She hesitated a moment. Please. Why did I feel like I should spill my life out to every person I met here? I decided again that I didn't care why. Both the gambler and the fearful one inside were too beaten up to make a problem out of it. I began on the Carbon River Road, where Mother Mountain had leaped at me from the map, and continued through the dream of the ancient man, my meeting with Everett Longhall, my discovery of this wonderful mountain spruce, its invitation, and what happened when I accepted. By the time I was done, the dawn had given way to daylight, and we had gone through the first and then a second pot of coffee. She never interrupted me once. When I was done, she simply said, "Thank you," and sat silently gazing at the ground, thinking hard. I waited as long as I could manage before breaking the silence. So now I hope it's your turn. If you can, I really need to know. What did I need? I need to know how I can make amends to this spruce. I feel like I don't dare accept another invitation like that again. And now that I think of it, that feels a little bit like dying. She looked at me searchingly. I don't think any one of us has ever met someone quite like you, Ray. Of the few humans that are capable of having this kind of relationship with a tree, almost none of them could even survive an encounter like that. There is no living thing that lives more intensely than a tree at timberline, or that works harder to just exist. At first I thought this spruce had been mortally foolish to invite you in, but now I'm not so sure. What could possibly have changed your mind? I may have killed it. To say it out loud made me want to weep. She shifted her position on the ground and gazed upward towards the rim of the bowl in which we sat. They know a lot more about some things than we do. More to the point, I suppose, they know things we don't even suspect. She hesitated. Did Hucklebark tell you much about some of the different people, human people I mean, that make their lives here? I looked up in surprise and irritation. You mean you don't know every word of what passed between me and Hucklebark? I thought everyone did. She could have gotten angry. I would have. Instead, she smiled with a trace of irony. 2 things, Ray. 1, we work together here in ways you haven't imagined yet. I suspect you will in time. 2, my own work keeps me away from human contact for fairly long stretches sometimes. I heard about you meeting Hucklebark from Ev. The generosity of her reply was enough to make me feel, again, like a complete bore, like a prickly, oblivious fool who blunders into a place of delicate beauty and sees nothing but a shooting gallery. I'm sorry. No excuses again for my bad manners. So Ev supplies you too? Ev supplies anyone who needs it. He spends most of his time wandering into every corner of the mountain and the country around it, bringing things to people. In between, he runs back and forth to the house of Windy Gap. Pardon me, the house of what? Windy Gap. It's the name some of us use for a meeting place up on the mountain. What kind of meetings happen there? She stopped and thought a moment. Sometimes we get together when there's something important to talk about because it's a very special place. If you consider any part of the land anywhere to be sacred, the House of Windy Gap ranks up near the top. But maybe what's even more important is that sometimes when someone needs something badly, perhaps they don't even know exactly what it is they need. They go there and simply wait. If their need has any chance of being met, the chances are best there. House of Windy Gap, I mused. What kind of house is it? Lila looked up in surprise and then waved her hand all around us. You're in it right now, Ray, she smiled. It's really very roomy. But the place I'm talking about is, I guess, the center of it all. The single most important place where things are learned and needs are met, if they can be met at all. I think I need to go there, I said. I think I really need to go there. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to everybody here. Thanks to everybody here at VashonLIVE. And I really appreciate the chance to read. I hope you all enjoyed it. And if you like the book, it's available at Books By the Way. I don't even know if they're actually open for mail order, but it's available at places like all the bigger stores around. So you can mail in for it. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed it.